The courtroom went silent the moment the judge broke the seal on my envelope. His eyebrows tightened, his jaw clenched, and the entire room shifted, like the air itself suddenly weighed more. He didn't look at me. He didn't look at my husband, not even at the lawyer who had spent weeks preparing to destroy my reputation. No, the judge just whispered 5 words that made my husband's entire world crumble. "Mr. Carter, sit back down." My husband froze mid-step. His confident smile evaporated. His expensive lawyer swallowed hard. 30 minutes earlier, he walked into that courtroom wearing the designer tie I bought him for his residency interviews. He thought he was finally free of me. He thought today would be clean, quiet, easy. After all, I was just the woman who paid his tuition, fed him, supported him, carried him through every exam and breakdown for 6 long years. But he didn't know what was inside that envelope. He didn't know what I'd been saving, and he had no idea the judge was about to read it out loud. But to understand how we got here, we need to go back. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And if you're new here, click on the subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Why did he betray the woman who built his entire career? What was inside the envelope so explosive it shocked a superior court judge? How did their perfect beginning turn into a legal battlefield? And why did she stay silent until now? Think about the people in your life who you've supported, who you've sacrificed for, who you've believed in when they didn't believe in themselves. Now imagine watching them turn their back on you the moment they no longer need you. That's what happened to Rachel Carter, and what she did about it will change how you think about loyalty, sacrifice, and justice. Some truths don't break marriages. They expose who was broken long before. Rachel Hayes met Daniel Carter in the most ordinary way possible, at a coffee shop near the community college where she was finishing her nursing degree. He was 24, sitting alone at a corner table, surrounded by thick medical textbooks and notes scribbled on napkins. She was 23, exhausted from a double shift at the hospital, just trying to grab caffeine before her evening class. Their eyes met when she accidentally bumped his table, nearly spilling his coffee. "I'm so sorry," she'd said, reaching to steady his cup. Daniel looked up, and instead of being annoyed, he smiled. That smile, warm, genuine, a little shy. "It's okay," he said. "I probably needed a break anyway. I've been staring at the same page for an hour." They started talking. He told her he was in his first year of medical school, struggling to keep up, working part-time at a pharmacy to cover books and rent. She told him about her nursing program, about her dream to work in pediatrics, about how she'd grown up watching her mother work 3 jobs to raise her and her 2 siblings. There was something easy about their conversation, something comfortable, like they'd known each other longer than 10 minutes. They exchanged numbers, started texting. Then coffee dates turned into study sessions. Study sessions turned into dinners at cheap restaurants where they split the bill. And dinners turned into late-night talks about their dreams, their fears, their childhoods. Rachel had never met someone who listened the way Daniel did, who remembered the small things she said, who made her feel seen. 6 months later, they were living together in a tiny 1-bedroom apartment with a leaky faucet and a heater that only worked half the time. But it didn't matter. They were happy. They were building something. Rachel graduated and got a job as a registered nurse at the county hospital. The hours were brutal, 12-hour shifts, nights, weekends, but the pay was decent. Daniel was still in medical school, drowning in tuition fees, textbooks, and the constant pressure of exams. That's when Rachel made a decision. She sat him down one evening and said, "I want to help you." Daniel looked confused. "Help me how?" "With school," Rachel said. "You're stressed about money. You're working 20 hours a week at the pharmacy and barely sleeping. Let me cover your tuition. Let me take care of rent and food. You focus on becoming the best doctor you can be." Daniel stared at her like she'd just offered him the world. "Rachel, I can't ask you to do that." "You're not asking," she said. "I'm offering. We're a team, right? When you finish school and start making doctor money, we'll be fine. But right now, you need support. Let me be that for you." He cried that night, held her close and whispered, "I don't deserve you." And Rachel, naive and in love, whispered back, "Yes, you do." For the next 6 years, Rachel worked herself to exhaustion. She picked up extra shifts, covered holidays, worked double weekends. She paid Daniel's tuition in full every semester. She bought his textbooks, sometimes used, sometimes new, when she could afford it. She packed him lunches so he wouldn't waste money on campus food. She paid for his medical board exams, the expensive review courses, the application fees for residency programs. She even bought him that designer tie, the navy one with the subtle pattern, because he had an important interview and she wanted him to feel confident. And Daniel? He studied. He excelled. He graduated near the top of his class. He matched into a prestigious surgical residency at a major hospital. Everything Rachel had sacrificed for was paying off, or so she thought. In those 6 years, Daniel changed. It was subtle at first. He started staying out later after classes, saying he needed to network with classmates. He joined study groups that somehow never included her, even though she was a nurse and could have helped. He started dressing better, talking differently, carrying himself with a confidence that sometimes felt like arrogance. Rachel told herself it was just growth. He was becoming a doctor. Of course he was changing. Of course he was evolving. But deep down, she felt it. The distance, the way he looked at her sometimes, like she was a reminder of a life he was trying to leave behind. By the time Daniel started his residency, Rachel barely recognized him. He was making a modest salary now, not much, but enough to contribute. Except he didn't. He started spending money on things they'd never been able to afford before. Expensive dinners with colleagues, a new car, financed but still far beyond what they needed, designer clothes, a watch that cost more than their rent. When Rachel asked about it, he'd brush her off. "I'm a doctor now, Rachel. I need to look the part." She wanted to argue, wanted to remind him that she'd been looking the part of a struggling nurse for 6 years while he figured out how to look the part of a doctor. But she didn't. She stayed quiet. She told herself things would get better once he finished residency, once they were both stable, once they could finally start the family they'd talked about. But things didn't get better. They got worse. Daniel started complaining about her, about the way she dressed. "You're still wearing scrubs everywhere," he'd say. "Can't you try to look nice sometimes?" About the way she talked. "You don't need to tell people you're just a nurse. You sound like you're apologizing for your job." About the way she existed, like she was an embarrassment, a burden, a relic of a past he wanted to erase. Rachel started noticing other things too. How he'd hide his phone when she walked into the room, how he'd get defensive when she asked about his day, how he'd started working late more often, even on nights when she knew his schedule was light. And then came the hospital events, the galas, the fundraisers, the mixers with other residents and attending physicians. Events where spouses were expected to attend. Daniel would introduce her to his colleagues, and Rachel would feel his discomfort radiating off him in waves. "This is my wife, Rachel," he'd say, not proudly, not warmly, just flatly, like he was checking a box. He wouldn't hold her hand, wouldn't put his arm around her, wouldn't stand close to her, and when she'd try to join conversations, he'd interrupt her or steer the topic elsewhere, like her input didn't matter. One night, Rachel overheard 2 of his colleagues talking in the hallway during a hospital gala. "Daniel's wife seems nice," one of them said. The other laughed. "Yeah, I guess. Doesn't really fit the vibe, though, does she?" Rachel's stomach twisted. She left early that night. Daniel didn't notice. 3 months later, Daniel came home and told her he wanted a divorce. Just like that. No warning, no conversation, no attempt to work through anything. He sat her down at their kitchen table, the same table where they'd eaten ramen together when they were broke, and said, "This isn't working anymore, Rachel. We've grown apart. I think it's time we move on." Rachel felt like she'd been hit by a truck. "Move on?" she repeated, her voice barely a whisper. "Daniel, what are you talking about? We've been together for 8 years. We've built a life together." "You built a life," Daniel said coldly. "I just lived in it, and now I need to build my own." Rachel's hands were shaking. "Is there someone else?" Daniel hesitated. Just for a second, but it was enough. "That's not the point," he said. "The point is, I'm not happy, and I don't think you are either." "I was happy," Rachel said, tears streaming down her face. "I was happy supporting you. I was happy being your partner. I was happy believing we were building something together." Daniel stood up. "I've already filed the paperwork. My lawyer will be in touch." And then he walked out. left her sitting there at that kitchen table, surrounded by the life she'd sacrificed everything to build, alone. Rachel didn't sleep that night. She sat in the dark, staring at the walls of the apartment she'd paid for, thinking about the 6 years she'd given him, the shifts she'd worked, the dreams she'd delayed, the future she'd believed in. And somewhere around 3 in the morning, something inside her shifted. She wasn't going to let him erase her, wasn't going to let him walk away like she'd meant nothing. She was going to fight, and she was going to win. The divorce papers arrived a week later. Rachel sat on the couch, staring at them, unable to believe what she was reading. Daniel wasn't just asking for a divorce. He was asking for everything. He wanted to keep their savings account, the one she'd contributed to almost entirely. He wanted the car, the one she'd co-signed for, because his credit wasn't good enough. He was claiming that because he was now the higher earner, he deserved the majority of their shared assets. And then came the part that made her blood boil. Daniel was requesting spousal support from her. He was arguing that because he was still in residency and making less than an attending physician's salary, he needed financial assistance during the transition. Financial assistance from the woman who'd already given him 6 years of her life and tens of thousands of dollars. The paperwork painted a picture of Rachel that she didn't recognize. According to Daniel's lawyer, she was a woman who lacked ambition, who had refused to grow alongside her spouse, who had contributed minimally to the household, and now needed to take responsibility for her role in the present marriage's failure. Rachel read those words over and over, her hands shaking with rage. Minimally, she had worked herself to exhaustion for him. She had sacrificed her own dreams, her own future, to make sure he could achieve his. And now he was standing in front of a court claiming she'd done nothing, that she'd held him back, that she was the problem. Rachel called the only lawyer she could afford, a family friend named Linda Jacobs, who did some pro bono work on the side. Linda was in her 60s, sharp as a blade, and didn't suffer fools. When Rachel explained the situation, Linda was silent for a long moment. Then she said, "Rachel, do you have any proof of what you contributed? Any records, receipts, bank statements?" Rachel thought about it. I think so. I paid his tuition online. I have email confirmations, and I kept some of the loan documents when I took out credit to help him with expenses. "Get me everything you have," Linda said. "Everything. We're going to bury this man." Rachel spent the next 2 weeks going through every file, every email, every bank statement she could find, and what she discovered made her sick. She'd paid over $90,000 toward Daniel's medical education, tuition, books, exam fees, review courses, application fees, living expenses during the summers when he couldn't work. She had emails from him, dozens of them, thanking her, promising her that he'd pay her back someday, that they'd be fine once he was making real money. She had text messages where he called her his angel, his rock, his reason for everything. She had records showing that she'd co-signed loans for him that he'd promised to pay off, but never had. And then she found something else, something that changed everything. Hidden in an old email account she'd almost forgotten about, Rachel found a forwarded message from Daniel to someone named Veronica. The timestamp was from 6 months ago. In the email, Daniel complained about Rachel, about how she was too simple for the life he was building, about how she didn't fit in with his colleagues, about how he was planning to transition out of the marriage once he was financially stable enough to do so without looking bad. And then, in the same thread, there were messages between Daniel and Veronica that made it clear they were having an affair. Romantic messages, plans to meet, photos, everything. Rachel stared at the screen, her heart pounding. She'd been right. There was someone else, and he'd been planning this for months, maybe longer. She forwarded everything to Linda, every email, every receipt, every loan document, every message. And then she sat down and wrote something herself. A letter, a detailed, chronological account of every sacrifice she'd made, every shift she'd worked, every time she'd gone without so Daniel could have what he needed, every promise he'd made and broken. She didn't write it with anger. She wrote it with clarity, with truth, and when she was done, she printed it out, signed it, and added it to the stack of documents Linda was preparing for court. Then she placed everything into a single manila envelope The envelope that would end up in that courtroom, the envelope that would change everything. In the weeks leading up to the court date, Daniel's behavior got worse. He moved in with Veronica, a fellow resident at his hospital. He posted photos on social media of them together at expensive restaurants, on weekend trips, living the life Rachel had made possible. He sent Rachel cold, transactional emails through his lawyer, reminding her that she needed to be reasonable and accept reality. He even had the audacity to show up at her apartment one night, acting like they could be civil. "Rachel, this doesn't have to be ugly," he said, standing in her doorway like he still had a right to be there. "We can settle this quietly. You move on. I move on. No drama." Rachel looked at him. This man she'd loved, this man she'd built up from nothing, and felt nothing but contempt. "You're right," she said calmly. "It doesn't have to be ugly, but it's going to be honest." Daniel frowned. "What does that mean?" Rachel smiled, a small, cold smile. "You'll find out," and she closed the door in his face. The night before the court hearing, Rachel couldn't sleep. She lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, thinking about everything that had led to this moment. She thought about the girl she'd been 8 years ago, the one who believed love meant sacrifice, the one who thought supporting someone meant erasing yourself. She thought about all the nights she'd worked while Daniel slept, all the times she'd gone without so he could have, all the promises he'd made that turned out to be lies, and she thought about the envelope sitting on her kitchen table, sealed and ready. She'd given Linda everything, every piece of evidence, every email, every receipt, every proof of who had really built the life Daniel was now trying to claim as his own. Tomorrow, the truth would come out. Tomorrow, Daniel would have to face what he'd done. Tomorrow, she would finally be heard. Rachel got out of bed, walked to the kitchen, and picked up the envelope. It was thick, heavy with years of proof. She ran her fingers over the seal, feeling the weight of it in her hands. This envelope represented everything: her sacrifice, her strength, her refusal to be erased. And tomorrow, a judge would open it. Tomorrow, the world would see who Daniel Carter really was. Rachel placed the envelope back on the table and went back to bed. This time, she slept. If this story has your heart racing, comment, "I'm still watching." Let's see who's truly following till the end. The morning of the hearing, Rachel woke up before her alarm. She showered, dressed in a simple but professional navy dress, and stared at herself in the mirror. She looked tired. The past few months had aged her, but there was something else in her reflection too. Strength, resolve. She wasn't the same woman who'd sat at that kitchen table crying while Daniel walked out. She wasn't the woman who'd believed his lies, who'd accepted his cruelty, who'd let him make her feel small. She was someone who'd fought back, someone who'd refused to disappear. Rachel grabbed the envelope, her purse, and her keys, and drove to the courthouse. Linda was already there, waiting outside the courtroom with a briefcase and a confident expression. "You ready?" Linda asked. Rachel nodded. "I'm ready." They walked in together. The courtroom was smaller than Rachel had imagined. Sterile, wooden benches, high ceilings, the judge's bench at the front, imposing and final. Daniel was already seated at the plaintiff's table with his lawyer, a sharp-dressed man in his 50s named Gregory Walsh. Daniel looked good, too good. He was wearing a perfectly tailored suit, his hair styled, his posture confident. He looked like a man who'd already won. When his eyes met Rachel's, he didn't flinch, didn't look guilty. He just looked annoyed, like she was wasting his time. Rachel sat down next to Linda, the envelope resting on the table between them. The bailiff called the courtroom to order, and Judge Harold Brennan entered. He was in his 60s, with silver hair, sharp eyes, and a no-nonsense demeanor that immediately commanded respect. "We're here today for the dissolution of marriage between Daniel Carter and Rachel Carter," the judge said. "Let's proceed." Daniel's lawyer stood up first. Gregory Walsh was smooth, practiced, the kind of lawyer who could make anything sound reasonable. "Your Honor," Walsh began, "my client, Dr. Daniel Carter, is a surgical resident at Metropolitan Hospital. He's dedicated his life to medicine, to helping others, to becoming the best physician he can be. Unfortunately, his marriage to Miss Rachel Carter has become untenable. My client has tried to make this work, but the fundamental differences between them have made it impossible to continue. Walsh painted a picture of Daniel as a hard-working, ambitious man who'd been held back by a wife who refused to grow with him. He claimed Rachel had been comfortable in her role as a nurse and had resisted Daniel's efforts to build a more sophisticated, upwardly mobile life. He argued that Rachel's lack of ambition had created resentment and that Daniel had been forced to move on in order to fulfill his potential. Walsh even had the audacity to claim that Rachel had been financially irresponsible, citing the fact that she still lived in their old apartment and hadn't upgraded her lifestyle despite working for years. "Your Honor," Walsh said, his voice dripping with false sympathy, "my client simply wants a fair division of assets and a reasonable amount of support as he completes his residency. He's not asking for much. Just what's fair?" Rachel's hands clenched under the table. "Fair? There was nothing fair about this," Walsh continued. "We believe Miss Carter contributed very little to my client's education and career. While she did work during their marriage, the majority of Dr. Carter's success is due to his own hard work, intelligence, and dedication. We're asking that the court recognize this and grant him the majority of their shared assets, as well as temporary spousal support." Rachel wanted to scream, wanted to stand up and call Walsh a liar to his face, but Linda put a hand on her arm. "Wait," Linda whispered. "Let him finish. Let him dig his own grave." Walsh sat down, looking pleased with himself. Daniel leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, looking like a man who'd already won. Judge Brennan turned to Linda. "Does the defense wish to respond?" Linda stood slowly, deliberately. She didn't look flustered, didn't look nervous. She looked like a woman about to dismantle everything Walsh had just said. "Your Honor," Linda began, her voice calm but firm, "I have a document I'd like to submit to the court. It contains evidence that directly contradicts every claim Mr. Walsh just made." She picked up the envelope and walked toward the judge's bench. Rachel watched as Linda handed it to the bailiff, who passed it to Judge Brennan. The judge looked at the envelope, then at Linda. "What is this?" he asked. "Proof," Linda said simply. "Proof of exactly who built Dr. Daniel Carter's career, and proof of who's been lying in this courtroom today." Judge Brennan broke the seal on the envelope. The courtroom was silent. Rachel could hear her own heartbeat, could feel Daniel's eyes on her, could sense the shift in the room as the judge began to read. His eyebrows tightened, his jaw clenched, and the entire room shifted, like the air itself suddenly weighed more. He flipped through page after page. Bank statements, tuition receipts, loan documents, email threads, text messages, the letter Rachel had written, and then the emails between Daniel and Veronica, the messages where Daniel admitted he was planning to leave Rachel, the photos, the affair, everything. Judge Brennan read in silence for what felt like an eternity. Finally, he looked up. His expression had changed completely. He was no longer neutral. He was angry. He looked directly at Daniel. "Mr. Carter," the judge said slowly, "sit back down." Daniel, who'd been leaning forward in his chair, froze. "Your Honor, sit down," the judge repeated, his voice like steel. Daniel sat. His lawyer looked confused, glancing at the papers in the judge's hands, trying to figure out what had just happened. Judge Brennan turned to Walsh. "Mr. Walsh, did you know your client lied under oath?" Walsh blinked. "Excuse me? Did you know?" The judge continued. "That Dr. Carter's entire medical education was funded by his wife? That she paid over $90,000 in tuition, fees, and living expenses? That she took out loans in her own name to support him? That she worked multiple jobs to make sure he could focus on school?" Walsh's face went pale. "Your Honor, did you know," the judge interrupted, "that Dr. Carter has been in an extramarital affair for at least 6 months? That he planned this divorce in advance, with full knowledge that he intended to financially exploit his wife? That he lied about her contributions, her character, and her role in this marriage?" The courtroom erupted in whispers. Rachel felt tears burning in her eyes, not tears of sadness, tears of relief, of vindication. Judge Brennan held up the papers. "Everything is here. Receipts, emails, loan documents, even messages where Dr. Carter himself acknowledges his wife's sacrifices and promises to repay her. And yet, he stood here today and claimed she contributed minimally, that she lacked ambition, that she held him back. The judge looked at Daniel with disgust. "Dr. Carter, you are a liar, and you have wasted this court's time." Daniel's face was white. His hands were shaking. His lawyer looked like he wanted to disappear. Judge Brennan turned to Linda. "Miss Jacobs, what is your client seeking?" Linda stood. "Your Honor, my client is seeking full repayment of all funds. She contributed to Dr. Carter's education. She's also seeking her fair share of all marital assets, and she's requesting that Dr. Carter be responsible for his own debts. She is not seeking spousal support. She simply wants what's hers." The judge nodded. "Granted. All of it." He looked at Daniel. "Dr. Carter, you will repay your wife every dollar she contributed to your education. You will split all marital assets 50-50, and you will be responsible for your own debts. You will not receive a single cent of spousal support. Do I make myself clear?" Daniel opened his mouth, but no words came out. Judge Brennan slammed his gavel. "We're done here. Court dismissed." The room erupted. People were talking, whispering, staring. Rachel sat perfectly still, her hands folded in her lap, tears streaming down her face. Linda leaned over and squeezed her shoulder. "You did it," Linda whispered. "You won." Rachel looked across the courtroom at Daniel, who was sitting slumped in his chair, his head in his hands. His lawyer was packing up quickly, clearly wanting to get out of there as fast as possible. Veronica, who'd been sitting in the back row, had already left. Rachel stood up slowly. She picked up her purse. She looked at the envelope, now sitting on the judge's bench, and felt a weight lift off her shoulders. She'd done it. She'd told the truth, and the truth had been enough. As Rachel walked out of that courtroom, she heard someone behind her say, "Good for her, he had it coming." She smiled. For the first time in months, Rachel smiled. The weeks after the hearing were strange, quiet. Rachel moved out of the apartment she'd shared with Daniel and into a small one-bedroom place across town. It was modest, but it was hers. No memories, no ghosts, just her. Daniel tried to contact her once. A single email, sent late at night 2 weeks after the court date. "Rachel, I'm sorry. I know I hurt you. I know I was wrong. I don't expect you to forgive me, but I wanted you to know that I realize now what I lost." Rachel read it once, then deleted it. She didn't need his apology, didn't need his regret. She'd already moved on. Linda helped Rachel set up a payment plan for the money Daniel owed her. It would take years, but Rachel didn't care. The point wasn't the money. The point was that he had to acknowledge what he'd done, had to admit, legally and financially, that he'd built his career on her back and then tried to throw her away. Rachel went back to work at the hospital. Her co-workers had heard about the case, some through gossip, some because Rachel had finally opened up about what she'd been going through. They were supportive, angry on her behalf, proud of her for fighting. One of her colleagues, an older nurse named Diane, pulled her aside one day. "You know what you did, right?" Diane said. "You stood up. A lot of women in your situation would have just accepted it, would have believed the lies their husbands told about them, but you didn't. You fought back. And you won." Rachel smiled. "I just told the truth. That's all it takes sometimes," Diane said. The truth. Rachel started going to therapy. She'd resisted at first, thinking she didn't need it, but Linda had gently suggested it, and Rachel finally agreed. Her therapist, a kind woman named Dr. Sandra Okafor, helped Rachel process everything she'd been through. The betrayal, the gaslighting, the feeling of being erased. "You gave everything to someone who didn't deserve it," Dr. Okafor said during one session. "But that doesn't mean you were wrong to give. It means he was wrong to take." Rachel cried during that session, cried for the girl she'd been, the one who believed love meant sacrifice, the one who thought supporting someone meant losing yourself. "I don't regret helping him," Rachel said through tears. "I regret believing he'd do the same for me." Dr. Okafor nodded. "That's the lesson, Rachel. Not that you shouldn't help people, but that you should only give to people who value what you're giving, who see you, who honor you." Rachel carried those words with her. She started rebuilding her life, started dreaming again, started thinking about what she wanted, not just what someone else needed from her. She went back to school part-time, taking classes toward a nurse practitioner degree, something she'd put off for years because she was too busy supporting Daniel. Now, She was supporting herself, and it felt good. 6 months after the court hearing, Rachel was working a shift in the pediatric unit when she ran into someone she hadn't expected to see. Daniel. He was doing a rotation in the same hospital, and their paths crossed in the hallway. Rachel's heart skipped a beat when she saw him, not because she still had feelings, but because she realized she didn't. He looked different, tired, older. The confidence he'd carried in the courtroom was gone. He looked smaller. "Rachel," Daniel said, stopping in the hallway. She stopped too, her hand on her ID badge. "Daniel." They stood there for a moment, silent. Finally, Daniel spoke. "I wanted to apologize. For everything. I know what I did was unforgivable. I was selfish. I was cruel. And I threw away the best thing that ever happened to me." Rachel looked at him, really looked at him, and she felt nothing. No anger, no sadness, just indifference. "I appreciate that," Rachel said, "but I don't need your apology anymore. I needed it a year ago. Now, I'm just fine without it." Daniel nodded, his eyes dropping to the floor. "I know. I wanted you to know." Rachel nodded once. "Take care of yourself, Daniel." And she walked away. Didn't look back, didn't wonder what he was thinking. Just walked away, because she was free. Rachel's life slowly filled with new things, new friends, new dreams, new possibilities. She started dating again, cautiously, but without fear. She learned to recognize red flags, learned to value herself, learned to walk away from people who didn't see her worth. 1 year after the court hearing, Rachel was sitting in a coffee shop, the same one where she'd met Daniel all those years ago, when she got a text from Linda. "Saw the final payment came through. You're officially done with him. Congrats." Rachel smiled and typed back, "Thank you, for everything." She put her phone down and looked around the coffee shop. It looked different now. Or maybe she did. She thought about the envelope, the one that had changed everything, the one that had held years of proof, years of truth, years of her life. That envelope had been her voice when she felt voiceless, her power when she felt powerless. And it had worked, because the truth always does. Rachel finished her coffee and stood up. She had class in an hour, a life to build, a future to create, and this time, she was building it for herself. As she walked out into the sunlight, Rachel thought about the girl who'd walked into this coffee shop 8 years ago. The one who'd believed love meant sacrifice, the one who'd given everything. That girl was gone, and in her place was a woman who knew her worth, who understood that love shouldn't cost you everything, who knew that the people you save from drowning shouldn't stand on your shoulders just to breathe. Rachel smiled. She was free, and she was never going back. "So let me ask you something. What would you have done in Rachel's place? Would you have fought back, knowing it would expose everything, knowing it would be painful and public, or would you have walked away quietly, letting him keep the lie, just to avoid the battle? Think about the people in your life who've taken from you, who've used your kindness, your support, your sacrifice, and then walked away like you were nothing. Did you fight back, or did you let them go? And more importantly, what would you tell someone you love if they were in Rachel's shoes? Would you tell them to be quiet, to be reasonable, to just move on? Or would you tell them to stand up, to speak the truth, to demand what's rightfully theirs? Because here's the thing. Rachel didn't win because she was angry. She didn't win because she wanted revenge. She won because she refused to be erased. She refused to let Daniel rewrite history, to pretend she hadn't mattered, to claim her sacrifices meant nothing. She won because she told the truth. And the truth, as painful and messy and difficult as it is, will always be more powerful than a lie. How many people do you know who've sacrificed everything for someone they loved? Who've worked themselves to exhaustion, put their dreams on hold, carried someone else's burden, only to be discarded the moment they were no longer useful? How many of those people stayed silent? How many of them believed the lie that they didn't matter? Rachel's story isn't just about a divorce. It's about value. It's about worth. It's about knowing when someone is taking advantage of your love and having the courage to say enough. It's about refusing to let someone else's ambition, someone else's selfishness, someone else's cruelty define who you are and what you deserve. And here's what I want you to take away from this. If you've ever felt invisible in your own life, if you've ever felt like the person you loved didn't see you, didn't value you, didn't honor what you gave, You are not alone. And you are not wrong for wanting more. You are not wrong for demanding respect. You are not wrong for walking away from people who treat you like you're disposable, because you're not. You matter. Your sacrifices matter. Your love matters. And anyone who tries to convince you otherwise is lying. Rachel's envelope was full of proof of what she'd given, proof of what Daniel had taken, proof of the truth. But the most important thing in that envelope wasn't the receipts or the emails or the loan documents. It was her voice, her refusal to be silenced, her decision to stand up and say, "This is what happened, this is who I am, and I will not let you erase me." That's the power of truth. That's the power of speaking up. That's the power of refusing to let someone else define your story. So if this story moved you, if it made you think about your own life, your own relationships, your own worth, I want you to do something. Comment below. Tell me, have you ever sacrificed for someone who forgot your value? Have you ever given everything to someone who walked away like you were nothing? And if you could go back, what would you tell your younger self? What would you do differently? Because the people reading these comments, the people watching this video, they need to hear your story too. They need to know they're not alone. They need to know that standing up for yourself isn't selfish, it's survival. And if you're watching this right now, sitting there thinking about someone who used you, who took from you, who treated you like you were disposable, I want you to hear this. You deserved better. You deserved honesty. You deserved respect. You deserved someone who saw your sacrifices and honored them, not someone who took advantage of your kindness and then blamed you for their own emptiness. And if no one's told you this yet, let me be the one to say it. You are enough. You were always enough. The problem was never you. It was them. Rachel's story ended with justice, with truth, with freedom. But not every story ends that way. Some people never get their day in court. Some people never get to confront the person who hurt them. Some people carry that weight forever. And if that's you, if you're someone who never got closure, who never got an apology, who never got to tell your truth in a courtroom or anywhere else, I want you to know something. You don't need their validation. You don't need them to admit what they did. You don't need them to see your worth, because you already know your worth. You already know what you gave. You already know the truth, and that's enough. That has to be enough. Because waiting for someone who hurt you to finally acknowledge it, to finally apologize, to finally see you, is giving them power they don't deserve. Your healing doesn't depend on them. Your freedom doesn't depend on them. Your worth doesn't depend on them. It never did. So, here's what I want you to do. If you're someone who's been through something like Rachel's story, or if you know someone who has, share this video. Let them know they're not alone. Let them know their sacrifices weren't invisible. Let them know their truth matters. And if you're someone who's ever been on the other side, if you've ever taken someone for granted, if you've ever used someone's love without honoring it, if you've ever walked away from someone who gave you everything and told yourself it was their fault, I want you to think about that. Really think about it. Because the people we hurt don't always fight back. They don't always take us to court. They don't always demand accountability. Sometimes they just walk away quietly, carrying the weight of what we did to them for the rest of their lives. And we tell ourselves we did nothing wrong. But we know. Deep down, we know. And one day, when we're alone, when we've lost the people who loved us most, when we realize what we threw away, it's going to hit us. And by then, it'll be too late. So if there's someone in your life right now who you've been taking for granted, someone who's been carrying you, supporting you, sacrificing for you, and you've been treating them like they're not enough, like they're holding you back, like they're the problem, stop. Look at them, really look at them, and ask yourself, what would I do without them? What would my life look like if they walked away tomorrow? Because they might. And when they do, you won't be able to go back. Rachel walked out of that courtroom a different person. Not because she won money, not because she humiliated Daniel, but because she finally saw herself clearly. She saw her own strength, her own worth, her own power, and she realized she didn't need anyone to validate it. It was always there. She'd just been too busy giving it away to notice. That's the real victory. Not the court ruling, not the repayment plan, not the vindication. The real victory was Rachel learning that she was enough, that she always had been. That the person she needed to fight for wasn't Daniel, it was herself. And once she did that, everything else fell into place. So if you take one thing away from this story, let it be this. The people who truly love you will never make you feel like you're not enough. They'll never make you shrink yourself to fit into their life. They'll never take your sacrifices for granted or treat your love like it's disposable. And if someone does, if someone makes you feel small, invisible, worthless, that's not love. That's control. That's manipulation. That's abuse. And you deserve better. You deserve someone who sees you, who honors you, who values you. And if you don't have that person right now, that's okay. Because the most important person you need to have that relationship with is yourself. Love yourself the way you loved Daniel. Support yourself the way you supported him. Fight for yourself the way Rachel finally fought for herself, because you are worth fighting for. You always were. And if you're sitting there thinking, but I already gave so much, I don't have anything left to give myself, I want you to hear this. That's exactly why you need to start. That's exactly why you need to choose yourself now. Because you can't pour from an empty cup. And you've been empty for too long. It's time to fill yourself back up. It's time to rebuild. It's time to remember who you were before someone convinced you that you weren't enough. You were always enough. You just forgot. Rachel's envelope was a symbol of all the proof she'd been carrying, all the truth she'd been holding, all the weight she'd been shouldering alone. And when she handed that envelope to the judge, when she finally let go of it, she didn't just hand over papers. She handed over the burden. She let the truth speak for itself. She let the evidence do the work, and she walked away free. That's what truth does. It frees you. Not always in the way you expect, not always in the timeline you want, but eventually, if you're brave enough to speak it, if you're strong enough to stand in it, truth will set you free. So speak your truth. Tell your story. Don't let anyone silence you. Don't let anyone convince you that your pain doesn't matter, that your experience isn't valid, that your voice isn't important. It is. You are. And the world needs to hear it. Before we close, I want to leave you with one final thought. Rachel's story ended with her walking into the sunlight, free, whole, and ready to rebuild her life. But her story didn't start there. It started in darkness. It started with betrayal, with pain, with feeling like she'd lost everything. And somewhere between that darkness and that sunlight, she made a choice. She chose to fight. She chose to speak. She chose herself. And that choice changed everything. So, if you're in the darkness right now, if you're in the pain, if you're in the place where Rachel was a year ago, sitting at that kitchen table with divorce papers in front of her and her whole world crumbling, I want you to know something. This isn't the end of your story. This is just the middle, the hard part, the part where you have to decide who you're going to be. And I'm here to tell you, you're going to make it through. You're going to survive this. You're going to come out the other side, stronger, wiser, and more yourself than you've ever been. Because that's what happens when you stop living for someone else and start living for yourself. You become who you were always meant to be. And that person is incredible. So don't give up. Don't stay silent. Don't let anyone make you feel like you don't matter. Because you do. You always did. And one day, you're going to walk out into the sunlight, just like Rachel did, and you're going to realize that everything you went through, every sacrifice you made, every tear you cried, it all led you here, to this moment, to this freedom, to this version of yourself. And it will have been worth it, not because of what you lost, but because of what you found, yourself. Thank you for watching this story. Thank you for being here. Thank you for caring about Rachel, for feeling her pain, for celebrating her victory. If this video moved you, if it made you think, if it made you feel something real, please hit that like button. Share it with someone who needs to hear this message, someone who's been through something similar, someone who needs to know they're not alone. And don't forget to subscribe, because we have more stories like this, more truths that need to be told, more voices that need to be heard, and we want you to be part of this community of people who believe in truth, in justice, in standing up for what's right, even when it's hard. This community of people who know that kindness isn't weakness, that sacrifice isn't foolishness, that love should never cost you everything. We'll see you in the next video. Until then, take care of yourself. Stand up for yourself. And remember, you are enough. You always were. And anyone who can't see that doesn't deserve you. Now go live your life. Go chase your dreams. Go be the person you were always meant to be. The person Rachel became. The person who knows their worth and refuses to settle for anything less. You've got this. We believe in you. And we'll be right here, cheering you on every step of the way. See you next time.